First of all, I want to thank you all for taking the time, the afternoons, the evenings, whenever you do your study of the piece, for learning this piece. Although it may seem easy on the page, you all know it's not, and you have dealt with those difficulties so well. I thank Joseph, who prepared it so admirably. Appreciate that. And you all remind me of the days when I had my choir at Temple Emanu-El, and the retreats we went to, the rehearsals we went to, off regular rehearsal times, and what a wonderful feeling of camaraderie and closeness was created by all of our love of music, specifically Jewish music in particular. And lastly, I must say to my friend, the notable, unique cantor, Ramon. Where is Ramon? Ramon. He is a unique cantor, a unique man who has done so much with his passion for Jewish music, with his rare combination of music knowledge and fabulous Jewish knowledge too, a rarity among many musicians and many Jewish scholars. And his devotion to promoting the cause of music here in the Washington area, wherever he has been. And that and his beautiful voice has enabled him to make a lasting contribution to the cause of Jewish music, and I salute him for that, and I thank him for selecting my piece to learn for the second festival of your choir. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to say just a few rather personal words so that we can all get acquainted in a short time. About myself, I am the product of a mixed marriage, and that is that my father was a Sephardic Jew who was born in Cochin, India, and my mother an Ashkenazic Jew who hailed from what is now being destroyed, Ukraine. How did they meet, you may ask? From Bombay to New York, where my mother grew up, where her father had come, immigrated. My father had gone to London to study law. He was the first Jewish barrister from India who studied law in London and became a lawyer. And my mother was going to the holy city in Israel on the Sea of Galilee to visit her father, who had retired there after he retired from his work in New York at a synagogue. So they met in Jerusalem, just like that. 3 weeks later, marriage. They found a rabbi, they got married. My mother, this New York Jewish girl, off she went to India, to a totally new culture, a totally new world, a totally new set of relatives. Even the Judaism was somewhat different. So there we were. There's where I was born, my brother, and we only came to this country just before the Second World War. In fact, my father said that we were the last ship that went through the Suez Canal before they closed it for the war. So that's the romantic background. I had to keep you interested a little bit, so I thought, well, I'll tell you a little bit of something romantic. But to get to the music and specifics, well, let me tell you, as we said, I was a music director at Temple Emanu-El in Dallas, which is, I think, the third largest Reformed congregation in this country. And we had a wonderful choir. I was fortunate. I came into the choir that had been established by a composer, I'm sure you've sung his works, Sam Adler, who is now in his 90s and still producing music at a prodigious rate. But he established the Temple Emanu-El Choir, and I was fortunate enough to come into it, and gradually over the years was able to build it. For some high holidays in the early 1990s, we had a choir of 110 in the choir loft. And it was staggering when you hear the great melodies and the great compositions of the high holidays sung in this mass of voices. And as I say, you all remind me of that wonderful choir, which helped me grow so much as a composer. Because, as I said, I learned my craft of composition, such as I have it, from hearing my experiments writing immediately being performed by the choir members. They were, if you will forgive a non-kosher reaction, they were my guinea pigs in composition. And it helped me very much to have them. Now, how did Azkara come into being? Actually, it's from a very personal relationship, and that was with the cantor from Temple Emanu-El in New York. Now, some of you may know it, on 83rd Street in Manhattan. The cantor there was an Israeli-born Ephraim Biran for many years, and we became acquainted through his wife Paula. We were both students at Juilliard, and Paula and I were in the same ear training class. And she met Ephraim when he came over and asked him to coach with me. His language is perfect, but he has this thick Hebrew accent. And she wanted me to coach him when he sang Handel arias in English, so it would sound, authentic. The funny thing is, he sang perfect English. You wouldn't have known he had an accent. But when he went to speak to you conversationally, suddenly you realized, that this was somebody from Tel Aviv. There was no question about it. Ephraim became the dearest friend I've had in my life. A mentor, a friend, a counselor, an advisor. And I wrote a great deal of music for him because he commissioned not only for himself and his adult choir, but he had a rousing children's choir, and we did a lot of pieces together, whole Shabbat services, in fact, for children's choir. And of course for him as a soloist. So we used to discuss Jewish music, our area, our field in common, and talked about a lot of the compositions, the great compositions. And he noticed this lack in one area of the Jewish repertoire. He said, there's a great, great repertoire of masses and requiem pieces and all kinds of burial works in the Christian tradition that are used on occasions to celebrate, to mark the deaths of great people, to mark anniversaries, historic anniversaries, symphony and chorus and soloist. We don't have anything of that nature in Judaism. Why don't we have similar pieces that would commemorate a great Jewish leader who has died? What do we perform for them in a concert version, in a situation like that? And he turned to me and we discussed this, and he said, why don't you write something? He said, you need to fill this vacuum, this void. Well, the idea didn't grab me at that time. I was just young. And I didn't think about anything like that. But as the years passed and I grew older, I thought, he's absolutely right. We need this. We need a repertoire of Jewish compositions that mark loss and mourning. The trouble is, there's nothing that we can appropriate from Christianity and their masses to mark Jewish losses, because the attitude and the approach is different. And their feeling about it and their liturgy about it is very different from Jewish. So I began assembling texts from the Jewish world, the Jewish literature, the Bible, that dealt with death and dying and grief and mourning. And I began to observe its services, cemeteries, memorial services, what pieces are used. And gradually over the years, I started to think of what would be appropriate and what would suit the Jewish approach. The strange thing was, the one parallel, that if I went into the world of the masses and looked at their liturgy, the first thing that you see is that there are Jewish elements in these Mass texts. For instance, there's a Sanctus, 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 Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai HaTzavaot. There's a setting of the Benedictus, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord. These are elements that are in the Mass that are derived directly from Jewish sources. On the other hand, there are pieces in the Mass that are inappropriate for Jewish sources. The one piece which is a stumbling block in the Mass, which is, in a way, the defining aspect of the Mass, is the Dies Irae, Day of Wrath. When you go to hear a Catholic or Christian Mass, this often is the movement that is the most gripping, that stands out in your mind, that overpowers you, because it describes the day of judgment and how the sinners will be punished and the righteous rewarded. And the words of the Dies Irae, they are echoing one great prayer of Judaism, not directly, but in the same path, and that is the great prayer of the High Holidays, Unatane Tokef. You remember when it says how the great trumpet will be sounded, and everyone will come as sheep to be judged before the Lord. And these words are also found in the Catholic Mass words. So that text, which centers on punishment, on sin, is not congruent. It doesn't match a Jewish memorial service, because a Jewish memorial service is devoted to the idea, really one idea only: consolation, solace, giving comfort to the mourner. And where the Dies Irae, in passage after passage, indicates that the mourner should worry because he is somehow full of sin, because he may be judged, because he hasn't lived a life according to Catholic precepts, the Jewish service doesn't deal at all with the mourner's feelings of that kind. It only deals with giving comfort to the person who is mourning the death of someone beloved to them. And so therefore the whole emotional content of the Jewish Azkara has to be different from what we have as a parallel in Christianity. And that was my approach to create this, to select the texts that gave feelings of mourning and comfort. And what are those texts? What is the primary text of mourning in Jerusalem, in Judaism? Is Kaddish, mourner's Kaddish, yes. And the mourner's Kaddish, as you all know, makes no mention of God, makes no mention of burial, mourning, loss, grief. It attempts to give the consolation to the mourner through only thoughts of praise to the Almighty. It goes that way, not hitting the mourner with any accusation that they haven't been a good enough Jew. And the El Malei Rachamim, what a beautiful text, filled with imagery of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, the memories, the precious memories. The 23rd Psalm, used in this piece, the 125th Psalm, I lift up my eyes, my help comes from heaven. Those are all texts that give comfort and solace to the person who is grieving. And that's what I attempted to do. I struck out on my own because there were no models. All I knew was that those were fundamental texts that had to be the El Malei, the Kaddish 121, the Lord is my shepherd, plus others that I gathered that were appropriate. And I put these together in an order that would give us the many themes the many dimensions of grieving and of sorrow, and of even in Adonai Notain Natan Adonai Lakach, God has given to us a precious person. God takes that person from us, and yet, Yehi Shem Adonai Mavorach, may God's name be blessed. I accept this. I accept this order of the world. Those feelings, not only of thanksgiving and gratitude, but all the churning up of resentment and sorrow and anger, blended together into a feeling of working to accept what has happened. So those were some of the things that impelled me to do Azkara. Sadly, my dear friend Ephraim did not live to see its completion. He died about 1.5 years ago. But the piece was written with thoughts of him in my mind, thoughts of a precious friendship, and thoughts of his support of me over the years as I labored in our vineyard of Jewish music, and as he promoted and encouraged me. And those things, those feelings also are in this piece. Azkara, you will relate, of course, to the Hebrew word Zachor, Zayin, Chaf, Resh, three-letter root, which gives us Yizkor, the service of remembrance. Yes? Yizkor, Azkara. These are Yom HaZikaron, Yom Kippur, the day of remembrance. So all of those are drawn from the same Hebrew root. Once again, I thank you for giving your time and your attention and your love to working, singing, learning, and I look forward to the performance, which I'm sure, if we have had any indication from the rehearsal, will be a deeply felt and committed one, and will give me great satisfaction. Thank you all so much. Ramon, can I tell them my special nickname for you? You won't object, I hope. Okay. You know, he is a most unusual name. I said he's unique. The name Ramon Tassat. Isn't that wonderful? I enjoy just saying it. But one day I said it wrong. I said Rimon. And you know, Rimon in Hebrew is a pomegranate. That's right. And I think how appropriate that Ramon is really a Rimon, because he's like a fruit bursting with juicy seeds, all of his love of Judaism, seeds that are sprouted from here. So Rimon, thank you so much. It's like, you know, in the Bible it says the priestly robes, they all were marked, they were directed in the pattern of Pa'amon, Rimon, Pa'amon. Pa'amon, Rimon, Pa'amon. A bell, a pomegranate, a bell. A bell, a pomegranate, a bell. And those were at the fringes, the edges of the high priest, of the priestly robes. So I think your voice is like a bell. Rimon, Pa'amon.
Thank you, Simon. May you continue writing profound music for all of us for many, many years to come. And this is already a remarkable time. And now this is time for us to begin to perform and do justice to this amazing, this really wonderful and profound composition, Azkara.